In 1885, a man named David Lamme paid an $800 gambling debt to win back a candy store his father had lost in a poker game. That candy store survived 2 world wars. It survived the Great Depression. It survived sugar rationing. It survived Hershey, Mars, and the rise of every grocery store chocolate aisle in America. And then, in April of 2026, after 141 years, it died because of a bean. The company is Lammes Candies. If you don't live in Austin, Texas, you've probably never heard of it. But for Texans, it's the candy equivalent of a hometown institution. The kind of place that supplies your grandma's Christmas pecan pralines, your aunt's Valentine's chocolate-covered strawberries, and the gift box your dad sends to a client he's trying to keep. Lammes is the oldest continuously running family business in Austin. It made the first soda fountain in the Southwest. The lamb on its sign was the first neon advertisement in the city. One of its employees, Mildred Hamilton Walston, worked there for 75 years. 75! The same job, the same store, the same praline recipe from 1892. And on April 24th, 2026, the family announced they were shutting it all down. Not because of mismanagement, not because of a scandal, but because the cost of one ingredient went up and the math stopped working. Let's back up. Lammes wasn't some sleepy mom and pop. By the 1990s, it was producing up to 1 million pounds of candy a year, shipping to Neiman Marcus and operating 8 retail stores. Their flagship product, the Texas Chewie Pecan Praline, was being made at a clip of 2,000 pounds per day at peak. More recent estimates put the company's annual revenue around $15 to $16 million, with somewhere between 50 and 100 employees depending on the season. That's not Mondelez. That's not even close to Hershey. But it's a real, profitable, family-run business that had figured out how to make money selling candy for 141 years. Now, here's the thing about a candy business at this scale. Your costs are pretty simple. You've got labor, you've got rent, you've got packaging, and you've got ingredients. Sugar, butter, pecans, and, for everything that isn't a praline, chocolate. And chocolate, of course, is mostly cocoa. For about 20 years, cocoa was one of the most boring, predictable inputs in the entire food industry. A metric ton of cocoa cost somewhere between $2,500 and $3,500. It barely moved. You could plan your year around it. You could sign multi-year wholesale contracts. You could tell your customers your prices a season in advance. And then 2024 happened. Between January and December of 2024, the price of cocoa would do something it hadn't done in over 60 years. And for a small chocolatier with no way to hedge, it was the financial equivalent of a meteor strike. Here's what happened. West Africa, specifically Ivory Coast and Ghana, produces about 70% of the world's cocoa. In 2023 and into 2024, that region got hit with a brutal 1-2 punch. First, heavy rainfall caused outbreaks of black pod disease, which rots cocoa pods on the tree. Then, dry, hot weather stressed the surviving trees. Layer on top of that the cocoa swollen shoot virus, which had been quietly destroying yields for years, and you had a full-blown supply crisis. The 2024 cocoa deficit hit 478,000 metric tons, the largest shortfall in 60 years. And the futures market did what futures markets do when supply collapses. It panicked. Cocoa started 2024 at about $3,800 a ton. By December, it hit a record $13,000 a ton. That is not a typo. The price of the main ingredient in chocolate more than tripled in 12 months. Now, if you're Hershey or Lindt or Mondelez, you've got a procurement team. You've got hedging programs. You've got long-term contracts. You can absorb some of the pain, raise prices a little, shrink the package a little, what the industry politely calls shrinkflation, and ride it out. Hershey still took a $100 million hit in 2025. Lindt raised prices nearly 16% in the first half of the year, but they survived. Now imagine your Lammes. You don't have a procurement desk. You don't have a futures trader. You buy your chocolate from a supplier, and that supplier is passing the entire commodity shock straight through to you. Your gross margin on a chocolate Longhorn, caramel, pecan, milk chocolate was already tight. Cocoa, depending on the product, makes up somewhere around 20 to 25% of your cost of goods. When that input triples, your gross margin doesn't just dip. It can flip negative unless you raise prices by something like 30%. And the moment you do that, your customers, who are also dealing with grocery inflation, rent inflation, and every other cost going up, start buying less. And here's where the story gets really uncomfortable. because most people assume a 141-year-old business is somehow protected by its history. But longevity, it turns out, is not the same as resilience. Let's talk about why a small, profitable, well-run chocolate company can't survive what a giant mismanaged conglomerate can. It comes down to three things. First, scale. Hershey buys cocoa by the boatload. They can negotiate. They can lock in prices a year out. A small chocolatier buys whatever their distributor has this month, at whatever price the distributor charges. Second, capital structure. A public company can issue debt, draw on a credit line, or just absorb a bad year against the balance sheet. A private family business has the family's money. That's it. There's no equity backstop. Third, pricing power. A Hershey bar at the checkout aisle can go from $1.50 to $1.75, and most people don't notice. A box of Lammes Pralines that goes from $30 to $42, that gets noticed. Customers postpone the purchase, or they downgrade, or they just stop. And then the U.S. government decided to make it worse. In 2025, tariffs were applied to cocoa imports and to imported chocolate from Switzerland and other producers. That's another layer of cost on top of the commodity shock. Even when cocoa prices started easing in mid-2025, dropping back to around $7,000 to $8,000 a ton, that's still nearly double the historical average. And JP Morgan's analysts are forecasting cocoa to stay structurally elevated at around $6,000 a ton for the medium term. The Lammes family ran the numbers. The flagship Airport Boulevard store would stay open just long enough to clear inventory. The Round Rock store closed first, then Hillside, then Lakeline. And they're not alone. 2 weeks before Lammes announced, Kate Weiser Chocolate, a 12-year-old Dallas artisan chocolate maker known for shipping nationally, announced its own closure. The pattern is happening across the industry. Boutique chocolatiers in Europe with multi-generational histories, independent shops across the U.S. The big brands are passing on prices and laying off staff. The small ones are just disappearing. So if a 141-year-old family business with $1 million a year operation, a beloved brand, and pecans from its own Texas suppliers can't survive this, what does that tell us about the rest of the food economy? The Lammes story isn't really about candy. It's about what happens when a commodity shock collides with a business model that assumes commodities behave normally. For most of the last 30 years, cocoa was so stable that small chocolatiers built entire businesses around prices that everyone assumed would never really move. They didn't hedge. They didn't diversify their ingredient base. They didn't need to. The market punished them for being efficient at running the business that worked yesterday. The big chocolate companies are responding by reformulating. There's now a whole emerging category of low cocoa and cocoa-free chocolate alternatives, using ingredients like carob and oat-based substitutes. Mondelez, Barry Callebaut, and Hershey are still investing in it. They're effectively engineering their way out of a commodity dependence. A small chocolatier can't do that. They can't reformulate a 134-year-old praline recipe and call it a praline. The recipe is the brand, which means when the input costs break, the business breaks with it. There's a real lesson here about resilience versus longevity. Lammes lasted 141 years because it did one thing extremely well, and that same focus is exactly what made it impossible to adapt when the math changed. The flagship store on Airport Boulevard is still open as of this recording, slowly running out of inventory. When it sells the last praline, that's it. 141 years of one of the oldest family businesses in Texas, ended not by a competitor, not by a recession, not by a bad decision, but by a bean grown 6,000 miles away.